Okay, I'm Kenn Amdahl, and I make my living writing books. And the reason that, but they're not really science fiction, but I know a lot of people that come to these conferences also like scary books. And I write books on sort of scary subjects. One of my books was There Are No Electrons, Electronics for Earthlings. So electronics is kind of scary. And one of them is Algebra Unplugged, and obviously algebra is scary. And one was Calculus for Cats, and that's about calculus, which is also scary.
I enjoyed it.
One was called Joy Writing, and it's about the creative writing process, so that's about writing. One was called The Land of Debris and the Home of Alfredo, and that's sort of self-explanatory. At any rate, I make my living as a writer, not by being up in front of people. So when they asked me to do this, I asked some of my friends for advice on what to do. And the first thing they said is, well, you got to start with a joke. You got to start with something funny. And so then another one said, what would be funnier than Kenn Amdahl in front of a room full of people holding a musical instrument? You know? And at first that hurt my feelings because I like to think that I'm about as musical as the next guy. And then I decided, you know what, I'll just rise to that challenge. I will do this talk holding a musical instrument. And so I borrowed this banjo, and I like it. I think it makes me look thin. I think it makes me look a little smarter. I'm probably going to keep it. So what we're going to talk about is the creative voice, primarily aimed at writers, but also aimed at every sort of art. What is your creative voice? Creative voice is your style. It's what makes you unique. If you are a musician, it's obviously music. If you're a writer, words, it's the way you use words. The big revelation for writers is this: all beginners sound the same. That's the biggest revelation. You have to work hard to sound like yourself. It's sort of it's a paradox, but it's true. So, and the same is also true of musicians. Every beginning guitarist sounds the same. And I can illustrate that one for you on my banjo here. After you put your fingers here in the right place, and then it comes out and sounds like kind of like that, right? And every beginning guitarist sounds like that, just like that.
Sometimes worse.
What?
Sometimes worse.
And sometimes worse. You know, I've got some natural talent. The odd thing is that many guitarists decide they want to maintain their artistic purity by refusing to practice, refusing to take lessons, and they always want to sound just like that. And some writers also apparently want to sound like beginners forever. So sometimes it's easier to look at one skill if you look at it from something that's not as close to your heart. So since most people are I'm going to assume that you're writers, and so we're going to look at this as a musician instead for a moment. So let's take the song in West Side Story. Remember have you all seen West Side Story? Yeah, okay. There was this female character, and I think her name was Maria, but I think every female character's name was Maria. Yes, that's how I remember it. It's that same way. And she had a message, and her message was that she thought she was looking pretty good today, right? And so she conveyed that message not just with the words to the song, but also with the big smile on her face, and she was dancing across the room, and she was flipping her hair. See how I flip my hair like that? And it came out like this. I feel pretty, I feel pretty, I feel pretty and witty and bright, and I pity any girl who isn't me tonight. Okay, I feel prettier already. Okay, she conveyed it. It was the words that she was singing, but also the way that she was singing it and everything else that was going on. The same song, the same content would have a whole different effect if somebody, say Bob Dylan, decided to sing that same song. It'd come out something like, I feel pretty, I feel pretty, I feel pretty and witty and bright, right? Same song, and yet the reaction is a little different here. Okay. You could go and almost take that almost any number of iterations. You could take, say, a Broadway baritone, like Robert Goulet. Anybody remember Robert Goulet? Robert Goulet had this great voice. So that's going to
C'est moi, I'm
That's
forced
right.
to admit.
There you go. So he can do Robert Goulet better than I can. But so you be quiet. But so he might do the same song and come out like this. I feel pretty, I feel pretty, I feel pretty and witty and bright, and I pity any girl who isn't me tonight. Okay, same song, but now the message is, this is a guy you want to edge away from in the locker room, maybe, And so he had that big voice and he had the big grin, always had the big grin. Now, your own creative voice, when you write, will be affected as much by your stylistic tendencies as that song is affected by the different people's styles who sing it. So you might wonder, how did those guys get their creative voice? Well, the answer is they stole it. In every case, this is how you get your own unique creative voice, is that you steal tricks from other people. Now, in the case of, you may not believe it, in the case of Bob Dylan, he stole Woody Guthrie's voice. And this is not, I'm not joking with you, he really did. When he was a teenager, he decided that he just liked Woody Guthrie, wanted to sing like it, and in fact, not only did he steal his voice, he was supposed to be house sitting for a friend. That friend had every Woody Guthrie album, and Bob Dylan swiped the guy's Woody Guthrie album so that he could practice with every one of them. So if you're not familiar with Woody Guthrie, his most famous song was like this. This is sort of the way he sang it. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island. Okay, so Bob Dylan stole...
You're not enough of a buzzsaw, but yeah.
Okay, but you get the idea. The trick is that then Bob Dylan stole the way Woody Guthrie held his voice, held his throat, held his body, the amount of nasality that he had, and then he added his own twist. And his twist is, Bob Dylan's, is that he falls off at the end of lines and off the end of words. Okay, and he stole that as well. Now, musicologists aren't convinced, but I believe that he stole this from Boris Karloff, who played Frankenstein. And remember when the villagers come with the torches, he goes, and he kind of falls off like that. So Bob Dylan does the same thing, the Woody Guthrie voice and the Boris Karloff, and get tangled up in blue, right? Okay, so how about Robert Goulet? Robert Goulet, I believe, stole his voice from, what was the guy's name? Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was one of the very first big superstars on the musical theater. Do you have a question?
Well, Robert Goulet was also classically trained.
Of course he was classically trained, but that's
So
what
was
they
Paul Robeson.
do. That's what they do in classical training, is they teach you to steal from other people. That's what you're doing from the teacher. He's giving you tricks, and you're imitating him. And then you learn how to do what he's doing. So in the case of Paul Robeson, he held his chest in a big way. He let a certain amount come out of his nose. He had his mouth big. And he was most famous for singing, Old Man River, you old man river. Big voice, all of this. Robert Goulet stole that. He added his own twist, and the twist was the grin. Okay, Paul Robeson never sang with the grin. Robert Goulet sang with the grin. Some music historians believe that Elvis Presley did the same thing. He stole from Robert Goulet. Stole the way he held his mouth and his nose. Stole the grin. But in his case, his little twist was that he only grinned out half of his mouth. See, so it came out kind of like, I can't help it, Mama, I can't get to move when I sing. Kind of like that, a grin but a big voice. Okay, so people are not unanimous in believing that. That's, I'll have to say that. Now, if you would like to develop your own unique creative writing voice for writing words, probably some of you would like to develop your own unique voice, absolutely your own, that just by sheer coincidence is identical to Stephen King's or perhaps J.K. Rowling's. By sheer coincidence. The good news is you can write just like them, and you get your creative voice the exact same way by stealing the little tricks from the writers that you admire. Now, in my book, I don't know if I mentioned my book, Joy Writing, we go through about 50 tricks that various writers use to come up with their own creative voice that you can steal, depending on which ones you like, and combine them into your own. But I don't have time here today to go through all 50, so I'm going to go through just two tricks that will radically transform the way you write if you pay attention. And they boil down to two words. One is observation, and one is precision. Observation and precision. Let's talk about observation first. Your job as a writer is to inhale life and exhale literature. Okay? Inhale life and exhale literature. Unless you're writing some kinds of self-help books, and then you probably inhale 10 simple ways to lose weight, get rich, and find God by eating chocolate or something, and then you exhale $1,000 bills. But I can't tell you about that. I can tell you about inhaling life and exhaling literature. Inhaling life, in my mind, what I mean by that is being observant, being engaged, being present in your own life, but especially being observant. Now, we all know there's two kinds of observers, right? There's one kind of observer who notices nothing. They don't notice how many people are in the room, they don't notice what they're wearing, whether the room's hot or cold, they don't notice their own emotions, they don't notice the effect that the words that they say have on other people. For example, they notice nothing. I like to call this type of observer men. Okay. But there's another kind of observer. This kind of observer notices everything. Okay? They do notice how many people are in the room, and they notice what they were wearing, and who was speaking to whom, and how close you were standing when you were speaking to them, and how pretty they were, for example. This kind of an observer notices what other people do with their socks when they take them off at night, if you can believe it. Do they put them on the floor? Do they put them in the hamper? Do they put them in the refrigerator? Yes.
A mother.
It could. This isn't the time for labeling. I don't think we need to label that kind of observer. But the truth is, to be a good writer, what you need to do is become a mixture of the two, but a very specific kind of mixture. You need to become keenly observant of what's important. And by what's important, I mean what's important to you. Okay? You need to become a Sherlock Holmes of your own life. What emotions are you feeling? How, if you're imagining a story, what's important in that story to you? If you are describing a person, what is the person what is the important parts of that person's personality to you? And this is actually kind of a switch for most of us, because we have to train ourselves just to get through days. We train ourselves to filter. Right? You can't look through a window and see what's on the other side if you're also noticing the reflection. You have to learn to filter out the reflection in order to see through the window. So most of us filter out all kinds of stuff every day, and other people notice so much stuff that they don't notice what's important. Okay? But now you're saying, how does being observant have anything to do with developing your own unique creative voice? Well, a couple ways. First of all, we will all observe different things, right? We all bring a different experience to bear on each thing that we're going to observe. So, because of my experience, if we have the same situation, based on my previous experiences, I will notice different things than you will, because different things are important to me. So that's one reason. Second, none of us have the same experience. None of us have the same experience, even in this room. Every one of us has a different experience going on right now. I'm up here being a little nervous, you're out there being a little bored. That's a different experience. This fella in the back there thinks he hears voices in the hallway, and he thinks they're plotting a murder. So when he writes the story, and he does, or maybe it's him plotting the murder, I'm not sure. At any rate, so he's having a different experience. This fellow over here behind the camera is peering through the camera, wondering how you turn this thing off. This guy's taking notes. Everyone's got a different experience of this event right now. The final way that observation actually will change the way you write and make your own, or paint, or play guitar or anything. The final way but especially write, the final way that being observant will change the way you write is by becoming an observant reader. We can read other people's writing in a Sherlock Holmes kind of way. I call it forensic reading. Okay, we're reading, looking for clues, looking for tricks, and I know we all think we do that, but we don't. So I want to get back to that in a second, because that's one of the my favorite topics. But before I do, I just want to say a word about precision, the other thing we're going to cover here. Precision. Your own unique creative voice will emerge to the degree that your language becomes precise. The reason for that is words are our tools, but we all have different sized toolboxes, right? Some of us have got a big New York toolbox with all these cultures and words that came out of the culture of New York, and some of us have got these little tiny Alaska toolboxes, for example. So different people have got different sized toolboxes. Beyond that, we all know some different words, but more specifically, we all like different words. I love the word eviscerate. You might prefer slice up, or some other similar word to convey a similar meaning. I love the word sesquipedalian. There may be people in this room that haven't used the word yet today. Okay, we each reach for a different tool, and so as we become more precise and we start reaching for exactly the tool, exactly the word that best describes what we're trying to describe, our unique voice comes through. The converse of that, or the inverse or reverse, is that the more generic your language, the more you sound like everybody else. The more generic your language, the more you sound like everybody else. So I'll give you, here's an example. Who said this? Who said this? Yeah, I went to a science fiction convention, the people were nice, and the food was pretty good. Who said that?
Pretty much everybody.
People. I just said it 10 seconds ago. You learned nothing about being observant. But you're right. Anybody could have said it. It's a generic observation expressed in generic language. Okay, now I'll try a different thing. Now this is something that I wrote in imitation of a relatively famous author's style. My guess is you won't be able to determine who it was, but here it is. My name is Kenn Amdahl, by the way. Amdahl convinced me to develop my own creative voice by employing the brilliant trick of reverse psychology. Amdahl spoke in his own voice. Whose style is that? I'll do it again. Amdahl convinced me, what?
Almost sounds like a ponies.
Okay, that might be a possibility, but try it one more time. Amdahl convinced me to develop my own creative voice by employing the brilliant trick of reverse psychology. Amdahl spoke in his own voice. It's Mark Twain. Okay, it's Mark Twain's rhythm. It's the degree of complexity of language, but more specifically, it used his favorite trick, which is insulting people by saying something that sounded at first blush like a compliment. Amdahl convinced me to develop my own creative voice by employing the brilliant trick of reverse psychology. Amdahl spoke in his own voice, and I'd say, thank you. Great, I'm glad I was able to help. And I said, what? He's really insulting me. Okay, give you another example. If you have a character in your book, say, I love you. May be exactly what you intend for the character to say. It may exactly convey what you want to convey, but you won't get any points for originality. Okay. The line has been written before. It was probably performed 1,000 times last night in Denver in bars around closing time, and those guys didn't get credit for originality either. If, however, you could convey that same emotion, that same intent of I love you by saying something like, darling, when I'm with you, you make me want to wear clean socks. Okay? Then you have conveyed the same thing in your own unique way, and you've opened a window to your soul that, let's face it, probably should remain closed. But nevertheless, it's a more original way to say it. One more example. When beginning writers and first drafts are identical, because beginning writers only write first drafts, they don't revise. So a beginning writer or a first draft might say this, and see if you can tell who said this. I think it would be good for our country if we got rid of prejudice and learned to live together regardless of our skin color or background. Does that ring a bell?
Sounds like MLK rough draft, Martin Luther King rough draft.
Brilliant. This is the first person that's ever got it. When this writer revised that, it came out like this. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. Same sentiment. He just chose exactly the words Martin Luther King did, exactly the words that he wanted to convey precisely his sentiment, and it's lived on for 40 years now. So that's observation and precision. But now I want to go back to observation and reading forensically, reading like a writer. And we all think we read like writers, right? We all think we're pretty good readers and pay attention. How many of you have read Harry Potter? Any of the Harry Potter books? Okay, except for you, who I know have read my book. Didn't you think it was cool what she did with passive verbs? Wasn't that a genius way to use passive verbs? What? We don't remember it all. So I'll just tell you. When you are in the land of muggles, that is the non-magic world, she uses almost 100% passive verbs. Is, are, was, were, been, almost 100%. When you get on the train and you go to the land of Hogwarts, the magical world, where magic is possible, she shifts. It's almost always half active verbs and half passive verbs, almost all the time. When magic is actually happening, she uses almost 100% active verbs. Now, if you didn't notice that, you're not reading looking for clues of how to improve your own writing. But very few people do. We get caught up in the story and so forth. And if we're writers and we get caught up in the story, it's hard to illustrate this difference. So I thought, okay, maybe I could illustrate the difference between forensic observation and casual observation by taking us out of the world, the familiar world of writing, and into the world of music. Because musicians do the same thing. We are always looking to steal tricks. And so I thought, okay, how about this? How about if I do a song and I tell you in advance what tricks I'm going to use, and then you can observe it as if you were a guitarist looking to steal tricks. Wouldn't that be cool? Well, I don't know, it might be cool. So I thought, okay, what song can I use? What song can I use? And it's got to be pretty simple, it's got to be kind of short, and it's got to be something I can do. And for some reason I started thinking of my Uncle Vince. My Uncle Vince lived with my family when I was growing up. He'd had polio as a child, so he was in a wheelchair. But he had one of those pretty big voices, and he loved to sing spirituals. So for some reason I got one of his favorite songs in my head, Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho. But I didn't sing it, I mean, I never performed it, but I thought, okay, maybe I can do that one. So I thought, let's see if I remember how that goes. It went, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. Jericho, Jericho, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. You can talk about your great King David, you can preach about the wisdom of Saul. Ain't none of them beat old Joshua at the battle of Jericho. I got about that far, and I realized there's two problems with using that song. A, that's all I know of it. It's probably other verses, but Vince never sang them, so I don't know them. And second, it doesn't really illustrate any points. So it's got a couple strikes against it. Then I thought, it's a simple song. I can probably create an instrumental version that is, and employ specific guitar tricks. Tell you what the tricks are ahead of time. And then I'll play my own instrumental version of it, and you could be watching for those tricks the same way a guitarist would be watching another guitarist, even if he's not as good a guitarist. I mean, it's not a quality thing. It's just looking to steal tricks wherever you can. So, okay, I'll come up with some tricks. Well, One trick that I liked was the old blues guys used a drone bass. They just kept hitting with their thumb on that low note. I always liked that drone bass, so maybe we can use that. Maybe we can throw, it'll sound different in this song, but it's kind of a cool trick. I thought, okay, how about Peter, Paul, Mary? Peter, Paul, Mary like to have an alternating bass like this. The thumb on the low strings is playing back and forth doing bass notes, and then with the fingers they play melody. Right? We can steal from Peter, Paul, and Mary. Now I thought, okay, as long as we're doing that alternating bass trick, how about stealing from Chet Atkins? Okay, Chet Atkins was an excellent guitar player, and he had a trick where when he wanted the notes to sustain, he'd squeeze down with his hand, left hand, and when he wanted them to muffle, he released it, so it muffles them. So on an individual notes, okay, so that's a little trick. We might be able to use that. Okay, how about we steal from accordion players? Okay, because it doesn't matter where you're getting your tricks. Accordion players, this guy has got, Scott, put that in front of the video here, if we can get it. What are the odds that he would be sitting right there next to this camera? Okay, that was not a plant. We're losing the entire flow here. Accordion players like to play a chord with the high strings and play the melody on the low notes. Maybe we could steal from accordion players. How about banjo players? They deserve to be stolen from, right? Now, I hope you don't have a sticker about banjo players.
Oh, I left my banjo in the car.
You know how you can tell when the stage is level? When a banjo player drools out of both sides of his mouth. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
What's the difference between a trampoline and a banjo?
A trampoline and a banjo?
Yeah. You leave your shoes on for the banjo.
I see. Okay, well, that's all right. We're even. Okay, how about so banjo players? If you hit a chord just like that, this is hitting a chord. If you're a classical player and you're playing one note at a time of that chord, you call it an arpeggio. If you're a banjo player and you get one note at a time like that, because the strings are so loose, you can do it quickly, and they call it a roll. It's a banjo roll. So we might be able to fit that in. We might not be able to get all these in. Then I thought, how about flamenco guitar players? And of course, you're way ahead of the rasguedo, right? We should steal the rasguedo, which is strumming down with your fingernails and then back up with your fingers. Rasguedo. Right? Pretty cool. Then I thought, ooh, what would be cool is if we could steal from Johann Sebastian Bach to throw in there. Wouldn't that be cool? Okay, Bach's favorite thing was counterpoint. If a melody's going up, he wants the bass line to go down. If the if the melody's coming down, he wants the bass line to come up. I thought, well, this song's got a melody that goes up a lot. It goes, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. Wouldn't it be cool if we could have a bass line that went down at the same time? Counterpoint, like something like, wouldn't that be cool? Yeah, it'd be cool, but it's not possible. You just have to know your limitations. So at any rate, you have all of these little tricks, and now you are a guitarist, and you have just walked into this bar. There's some clown up on there with this guitar, and you're probably a better guitarist, but still you have larceny in your heart. And so he's going to play Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho, and you're going to be watching for tricks. One trick that I forgot is one that I invented, and that's using your pinky to muffle the strings. Invented that in the 60s. I think people have stolen it since then. Now, was that a little different?
It was a lot
Experience.
different.
Because the way you were watching for tricks, right?
I always watch for tricks.
You always watch for tricks, yeah, but you carry an accordion bumper sticker there in your handbag too, so you don't count
With
necessarily.
a picture of my Uncle Larry on it.
Well, of course it's got a picture of your Uncle Larry on it.
What
I think that went without saying.
So what I noticed
Yes.
is not just watching for tricks, but this is so much richer
Yes.
than the original. I mean, all of that stuff, I mean, I think some of it works better than other parts of it, but as a whole piece.
Well, and my foot, this was kind of slippery here. I'm not used to
No,
playing
no,
with my
that's
foot up
okay.
like this, but
So
okay.
I'm watching the tricks and I'm trying to, my ears are saying, okay, is that this thing or is that this thing? And so I'm parsing them out, but listening to them in its entirety, it's much richer piece. It's a much fuller piece. I
Well,
like that.
that's my experience. It's a richer, she's saying it's a richer experience if you're watching for all those tricks. That's the experience that writers have when they read. I mean, it's more fun for me to read than it is for most people because I'm engaged in a different way. The other thing that I want to say about this experience here is that let's think about that arrangement. I stole from accordion players, and yet probably no one would walk in the door and say, heavily influenced by the accordion. Well, maybe him. I stole from old blues guys, but probably nobody would call that blues. Stole from Chet Atkins, and darn it, nobody would call me Chet Atkins. Stole from banjo players, but nobody would call that a banjo tune. So I stole these tricks, little individual things that I liked from other musicians, from every kind of source, assembled them. And if we had 50 guitarists blindfolded in a room, and we all knew each other, every one of them would hear that and say, oh, that's Kenn Amdahl. I'd recognize his style anywhere, his unique creative voice. Obviously I stole it, and yet by assembling it all together, my own unique creative voice emerged by the choice of the tricks that I stole. Now, we have, we've got time for questions and we've got time for this other thing, so let me just do this other thing. And if you've got some questions, you can, first of all, does anybody have any questions? Because I think we can handle any questions here shortly. Yeah.
The question I have, I write primarily nonfiction, and I guess that I have been told that I have a distinct voice, and sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes not.
It's always a good thing.
Yeah, and I also, because of the nature of the writing, a lot of my day job writing, I have to be a chameleon in my writing. And I guess the question that I have, there are two questions. One is, how do you, or can you keep writing, doing the chameleon stuff that I have to do for my clients, and also continue developing my own voice? So that's part of the question. And the other part is that when people read your work, do they have that recognition? And is that helpful to you as a
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. The comment that I get about and obviously I'm writing about, besides just my fiction and my poetry and my songs, I'm writing about things like calculus and algebra. And the most frequent comment I get is that, Ken, it was just like being in a room listening to you talk. I mean, it's almost uncanny because I don't think I talk especially eloquently, but for some reason my choice of language and the way I talk certainly comes through. So yes, as you develop a unique creative voice, it is good, people like it, and so forth. As far as being a chameleon, having to adapt your style of writing to the role that you have to play at your job, that's useful practice. I remember one time in college at a creative writing class, we had to write poems in imitation of different poets'
I've done that
styles.
exercise. I hate that exercise.
And, oh, I loved it. I loved it. And so there was, I still remember my poem about Houseman, which was, I remember Houseman, he knew that he was young. He watched his team plowmen as they toiled beneath the sun. But now the poet sleeps, his lightfoot verse is still, and lip like roses kiss and keep watch o'er him on the hill. Okay, well, I would never write that poem on my own volition, but by using Houseman's way of rhyming and his choice of metaphors and so forth, it came out, and to me, it sounds pretty much like Houseman. So that was fun, and I think to the extent that you imitate other people consciously, it's a good thing. If you do it unconsciously, I think it's a bad thing. You know, as long as you're consciously saying, I want to write an Edgar Allan Poe poem, you know, or a Stephen King novel, as long as you realize that you're doing that and you're not merely unconsciously derivative, I think it's a great thing. Is that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think it is wonderful practice to do that, and I don't think you should feel like you risk losing a part of your own soul or your voice or whatever because you're having to do that. I think what will actually happen is that your own unique voice will emerge even more fully when you realize, okay, I'm not having to play this role. I'm not writing a Houseman poem now. Now I'm writing one of my own poems. So I don't think it's a bad thing. So I'm going to do one other thing, then we're going to be done here. But if there's any other questions, so you guys had good timing. Okay, this is a little bit self-indulgent on my part, but it does have to do with creative voice, and it has to do with time travel. And I thought, man, what other group would be better to join me in some time travel? This May, my oldest son gave me a book of Irish songs that was published in 1808. Okay, and all it had was the melody and the words. And I didn't know any of these songs. I'd never heard any of them. And didn't even say who wrote the songs. And so I started working my way through trying to learn the first one and figuring out what chords would fit it and whether it was happy or sad. Because, I mean, you can accompany a melody 1,000 different ways. I mean, you could do happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. And if all you have is a melody, that's just as good an accompaniment, but it's not exactly the creative voice that the guy had in mind. It could be happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. Sorry, not really Irish, but at any rate, so it was a difficult, it is a difficult challenge for me to get into the creative voice of the guy that wrote these songs, the different people who wrote the songs. And this, I now have a favorite songwriter from 1808, a favorite Irish songwriter. His name is Edward Lysott. I had to track him down on the internet. Neat guy. And this song was well enough known to be put in the book in 1808. It was still well enough known 50 years later that there's a Civil War, it's called A Sprig of Shillelagh. There's still a Civil War song that says, sung to the tune of A Sprig of Shillelagh. 1915, there's a World War I song. 100 years later, it's still well enough known that there's a World War I song sung to the tune of A Sprig of Shillelagh. It has never been recorded. Not on CD, not on record, not on wax. It just kind of slipped out of the consciousness when people started to record songs. So you folks will be the first people in 100 years to hear this song, maybe in 200 years. And so because there's been a little bit of translation change, I'll just give you a little bit of background, just a little bit of background so you can appreciate the song better. First, in 1808, Napoleon was threatening the British Isles, and he was threatening to invade Ireland. Ireland had just gone through a revolution in 1798, the Irish Revolution, that failed. It was brutal and bloody, and it failed, and a lot of people were killed. And at this point in history, Ireland is trying to decide whether it should completely secede from England, whether it should just become a state of England, or whether it should remain an independent country with a brotherly relationship. Okay, and the songwriter here, I know that's what he wanted to do. A couple other just words. There is no shillelagh tree. Okay, shillelaghs are made out of oak. The phrase "a sprig of shillelagh" is a joke. It's like Teddy O. Roosevelt saying, "Speak softly, lad, but carry a wee sprig of shillelagh." It's a club. The shillelaghs were their walking sticks, but they used them as clubs. Second thing you should know is it says, at one point it refers to who's ever seen Donnybrook Fair. I thought at first it just meant a fight. And I thought, well, I wonder if there really was a Donnybrook Fair. It turns out, for 600 years, every August, there was this huge fair in Donnybrook, Ireland, that was famous for drinking and fighting and gambling and people dressing up in odd costumes and singing songs that they make up the words to old existing thing, filk music. So I thought, you know what, this is the place, this is the group that would like this song. So we have that, and then one last thing you need to know, you don't need to know it, but the rose is England, the thistle is Scotland, and the phrase, there was a phrase in it, the land of the oak. And the phrase just didn't fit, it seemed to mean something special to me, just the way it was used. So I did some research. The land of the oak is where Zeus came from. That's how he's always referred to. So when you say the land of the oak, you mean heaven. And the next closest place, which is Ireland. Okay, so you wouldn't necessarily get those things. This is kind of a tricky song to sing after you've been talking for an hour. It's got the same range as the Star Spangled Banner. It goes from as low as you can sing to as high as you can sing. It's called Sprig of Shillelagh. I'm going to do one key higher. Oh, love is the soul of a neat Irish man. He loves all that's lovely, loves all that he can, with a sprig of shillelagh and a shamrocks o' green. His heart is good humour, 'tis honest and sound. No malice or hatred is there to be found. He courts and he marries, he drinks and he fights for love, all for love, for in that he delights, with a sprig of shillelagh and the shamrocks o' green. His hair had the luck to see Donnybrook fair, an Irishman all in his glory is there, with a sprig of shillelagh and the shamrocks o' green. Clothes spick and span, new without e'er a speck, a neat Barcelona tied round his neat neck. He goes to the tent and he spends his half-crown, meets up with a friend and for love knocks him down, for a sprig of shillelagh and the shamrocks o' green. This evening returning, his homeward he goes, his heart soft with whiskey, his head soft with blows, from a sprig of shillelagh, the shamrocks o' green. He meets with his Sheila, who blushing a smile, cries, "Get ye gone, Pat," yet consents all the while. To the priest soon they go, and 9 months after that, a fine baby cries, "How do you do, Father Pat, with your sprig of shillelagh and your shamrocks o' green?" Bless the country, say I, that gave Patrick his birth. Bless the land of the oak and its neighbouring earth, where grows the shillelagh and the shamrocks o' green. May the sons of the Thames, the Tweed and the Shannon, drub the French who dare plant at our confines a cannon, united and happy at loyalty's shrine. May the rose and the thistle long flourish and twine round a sprig of shillelagh and the shamrocks o' green. So, thank you guys for coming. That's all we have, unless you have other questions. Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
Okay, I have heard this.